And so Geisler turned to Gerstner and said, well, then who gave Lucifer the desire to sin? And Gerstner said, mystery. And Geisler said, contradiction.
You mentioned this just now about the motivation to do apologetics. Mm-hmm. If you believe God is ultimately deciding what the person you're talking to is going to decide with regard to their faith, then what motivates you to spend all day long, as Paul does in Acts chapter 28, trying to persuade them? What motivates you to go through all of the evidences instead of just saying, hey, Jesus died on the cross. If you would believe in him, you'll be saved, and just leaving it at that? I mean, if you're a Calvinist, you can obey the command to tell the good news, but not even get involved in apologetics. So that would be my big question, is what's the motivation of being an apologist to begin with if you're going to adopt the Calvinistic system?
And I might add this too, Leighton, that if God, I think God gives us partially anyway, not to a full extent, but he gives us the dignity of causality. What do I mean by that? That God gives us the ability to affect not only time, but eternity with what we do. And if God does it all, then why are we even here? I mean, he doesn't need us to preach the gospel if he determines overrides the free will of human beings. He doesn't need us to do a thing, right? But he does, if we do have free will, he gives us the opportunity to actually affect time and eternity. You know, I'm reminded of a debate years ago at Dallas Theological Seminary that my mentor, Dr. Norman Geisler, had with Dr. John Gerstner, who Geisler described as the reincarnation of Jonathan Edwards, right? And they were having a debate over this very issue. And according to Geisler, I never got Gerstner's side of it, but according to Geisler, here's what happened in one of the exchanges. Dr. Geisler turned to Gerstner, and of course, Geisler is giving our view, the fact that we're chosen but free, and Gerstner's the 5-point Calvinist, and he turns to Gerstner and he says, does man have free will? And Gerstner says, yes, well, man has free will to do what he desires, but God gives him the desires of his heart. And so Geisler turned to Gerstner and said, well, then who gave Lucifer the desire to sin? And Gerstner said, mystery. And Geisler said, contradiction. You see, even R.C. Sproul would, when he got to that point, he would just say mystery. And R.C. Sproul was one of the most brilliant philosophers out there. He would just say mystery, when the reality is it's a contradiction to say that God is all good, yet he gives his creatures the desire to do evil. He takes away their free will, the desire to do evil, and then they act on that. That's not the God of the Bible. That's Allah, okay? God is not essentially good. Whatever God does is good. That's Allah. That's voluntarism. That's not essentialism. There's no ground of goodness if the 5-point Calvinist God is the God of the Bible. That just results in a voluntaristic Allah. Whatever God does is good. So I've heard some people even describe the God of the 5-point Calvinist as Allah. Now, of course, they would push back on that and make some modifications somehow, but I think that's inevitably where it leads, Leighton. It leads to a God who's arbitrary.